All right, well, welcome everybody to How to Photograph a Solar Eclipse. My name is Pete DeMarco. I'm a photographer based in New Haven, Connecticut, and I lead photography workshops and tours. And I'm joined by my special guest, Ujjwal Datta in New Jersey. Ujjwal, you want to just say hello and introduce
Sure.
yourself?
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Ujjwal. I'm a podiatrist by profession, but astrophotography has been my new passion since COVID. And I joined Pete in the annular eclipse in October. So that was my first time shooting it. And we had a great time. So now I'm looking forward to this total eclipse.
So, yeah, let me give you a little backstory of how this all started. It's always been my dream to see an annular eclipse or photo eclipse. So there was one last year on October 14th, and I was running a tour in Canyonlands and Arches National Park, and I saw the dates lined up with of the Milky Way lined up with the eclipse. And so I set up this tour, and Ujjwal joined the tour, and we went down to Arches and Canyonland, well, to this place called Muley Point near Arches and Canyonlands. This is last year. And this is the first eclipse and only eclipse I've ever photographed. And the same with Ujjwal. And so
Yep.
neither of us are, I would say, gurus, are super experts, but I definitely learned a lot. And I think there was a lot of kind of conflicting information online. So for sure, you're going to learn a bunch here tonight. This is where we saw the eclipse. It was again at Muley Point, and there's this place called Goosenecks State Park. And right below Goosenecks is the San Juan River. So this is in southern Utah, right by the border with Arizona. And we were kind of up on the other side of that mesa. So we're up on this big mesa looking down with the San Juan River below, and it was just incredible. So there's a few things though that I wish I knew that I want to share with you tonight. Some Eclipse basics, when and where to watch, viewing safety, choosing the right gear, essential camera settings, and creative composition techniques. At that point, Ujjwal is going to share a few of his photos and talk about how he took his shots. And then there'll be time for a Q&A at the end. I have a lot of information to go over, so I'm just going to kind of give a kind of info blast for about 30 minutes. And then if you have a question at the end, that would be the time to chime in with your questions. Also, like I said, I'm not an expert, and there is a disclaimer to this. Take everything that I say with a grain of salt and do your own research. I can't promise that you're going to have everything's going to work exactly how I'm saying, but I'm really confident in the information that I'm sharing here with you tonight.
And please take eye safety seriously.
Yeah, I'm gonna go over that. Thank you, Ujjwal. So a few basics. Everybody knows the moon is in front of the sun. And the important thing to know here, and thing I didn't really realize, was there's this two parts to the shadow, the umbra. I don't really know how you pronounce that, and penumbra. So the umbra is the part that's totality, and that's totally blocked. And the penumbra, that's the partial eclipse. So that's the kind of difference between the total eclipse and the partial eclipse. There's three parts to the eclipse, or three kinds. You can have partial, annular, and total. And obviously the one coming up is a total eclipse. And an annular eclipse, which we saw, is a little bit different because the moon is at its maximum distance from Earth in its orbit. So the umbra, or the shadow cone, doesn't totally reach the Earth. And that's why you have this kind of wider ring. It's also known as the ring of fire, these annular eclipses, and they're also more rare. but this one is a total eclipse. So the first thing is when and where can you view the eclipse? It's going to happen. You can see it from Canada down to Panama, basically. In the US, some important things to note are obviously in totality, which is the dark bar in the middle, you're going to have that small ring around the sun and the moon. But even in a place like New York City, you're still going to be able to view 90% of the eclipse. So 90% of the sun will be covered by the moon, which is quite a lot. It won't be totality, but it's still going to be a lot. Also in Houston, you have 90% in Houston. If you're in Wyoming, it's 40 to 50%. And if you're over Washington State, you're around 20%. Also, Canada has really good views in Montreal and in that area, also northern Maine. So, how do you plan where to go? And this is one of the biggest things that I learned from shooting the first eclipse. This is what I didn't really know what this really how this all means. I didn't totally grasp it until it actually happened. So there's a great map online you can use. It's by Javier Hubier, and I put the info at the bottom. So if you just Google that map or his name and April 8th total solar eclipse, you'll get an interactive map on Google to plan where you're going to go. So for my plan, I'm here in New Haven, Connecticut, and my first choice is going up somewhere in Vermont, mainly because it's closer. It's about a 4.5 hour drive. And I like also Vermont. There's two highways, 91 and 89, so I can go kind of in two separate directions if one's super crowded. Probably Burlington will be slammed with people. And I'll talk about that in a second. The second option is Rochester. That's probably just another hour and a half drive on top of what it would take me to get to Burlington. I'll tell you why in a minute, why I have a plan B. So when you look at these kind of eclipse maps, you want to be, if you want to experience the longest amount of totality, you want to be as close to that blue line or the center as possible. The further away you are from that blue line, or the closer you are to the red line, the shorter the amount of totality is. So to give you an example, Buffalo is Buffalo, New York is you'll have 3 minutes and 45 seconds of totality. And if you're in Syracuse, you'll have 1 minute and 46. And so if you look
Oh,
to the right of to the right of Rochester, you can see Syracuse. Do you see how Syracuse, right above New York, is almost touching the red line? So if you're at the edge of the red line, you're going to be in totality for 30 seconds. And what that means is when you're in totality, from a photography standpoint, the totality is going to happen really fast. If you just have 30 seconds, everything's going to just fly by. When Ujjwal and I were in Utah, I think we had about 3.5, almost 4 minutes of totality. So you have plenty of time to kind of line up the sun as it crosses through the middle, if you want to get that perfect kind of symmetrical shot. So, oh, if you do use this map and they have these little pop-up boxes, keep in mind the time. If you see at the top, I circled the time in green. The time is UT. It's not Eastern Standard Time or whatnot. So just keep in mind that these times are not probably the time that's in your time zone. So just check to make sure it's your local time. I think in Burlington, is it around 3:30 or something like that? Actually, yeah, Ellie's shaking her head. Cool. So basically, bottom line is the goal is if you want to be in totality longer, get closer to this blue line. And if you want to see totality at all, you have to be inside the red lines. That's kind of the main learning from there. So one thing to look for is rain. And this is why I have a plan B. I did this last week, actually. I was just kind of researching And if you look, if it's a storm that's covering the northeast of the US or half of the US, it doesn't matter. But sometimes you get these like nor'easters or something like that. You have a clear line of rain. So in this case, if the eclipse was, if I looked at the weather in the morning and saw this, then obviously I would go to Rochester because it's not raining in Rochester. It's about 300 miles to the west. Another thing you want to look out for is clouds. And if you go online, you can see like a cloud forecast, the live cloud forecast. Here, definitely at this moment, Burlington, or at that moment, Burlington's totally cloudy. Rochester seems like partly cloudy. And if the clouds are moving north, there's a potential that, it might be partly cloudy and I'd be able to see the eclipse in Rochester instead of Burlington. So, but clouds are moving fast and it's something hard to predict if you're planning 12 hours out, a day out, or 3 days out. But the morning of the eclipse, definitely I'm going to be checking the weather maps and that will influence kind of where I'm going to go. So far, the forecast looks good for the northeast part of the US. If it is cloudy where you are, don't put away your camera. First, you can still get some photos through the clouds sometimes. That's one thing to look out for. Also, you'll see the clouds will dim. So when you go into totality, the light dims, it gets darker. So you could also, if you want to do a progression of, lighter clouds to darker clouds, it's not the same thing, but it's something. And at least you'll experience it get a bit darker. Also, if it's partly cloudy, then you're just hoping that a cloud isn't covering the sun during totality. And so that's another reason to kind of, if you're in totality longer, if you're in the totality for 30 seconds and a cloud covers the sun for those 30 seconds, you lose the shot. But if you're in it for 4 minutes, then you have time for a cloud to kind of drift by. So these are kind of all these little planning things that if you really want to guarantee or to the best of your ability to get a good shot, these are some things that will help you increase your chances of getting a shot. Arrive. We talked about this earlier. It's makes sense. Arrive early or the day before, if possible. Arrive the day before. If you haven't made plans already, it's too late. All the hotels are booked. They're like $1,000 a night. My plan is to get up at 4 a.m. and drive super early and just hopefully there won't be that many people on the road. Niagara Falls declared a state of emergency. So, anyways, just get out there early. All right, some safety, really important. This is the most important thing. The most important part, if you only pay attention to one part, just listen to these next few things that I say. First, for your camera, some people wonder, is it safe to take a photo of the sun? Yes, this is a 600 millimeter photo of the sun direct. I just lifted up my camera, took a shot, and put it down. I didn't hold my camera there forever. Here's another photo. Of course, if you're on a wide angle, it matters even less. So you totally can take photos of the sun, no problem. Joanne's laughing because she was on my tour that I took this shot, but I think you had left that morning. You had already left because it was the end of the tour. But anyway, this is Hoi An, Vietnam. So what happens if I hold my telephoto lens at the sun for a few seconds? It's like holding a magnifying glass up. In a telephoto, I mean like a 300 millimeter, 600 millimeter, or something like that. It magnifies the sun. These are some photos from lens rentals. They're actual gear returned from lens rentals that were ruined from the eclipse. It's not just about burning through your sensor. You can actually burn the blades in your lens. Funny thing, I rented a 600 millimeter from lens rentals and bought the insurance plan thinking, oh, well, if I break it or ruin it, it's covered with insurance and whatnot. Nothing happened, but just keep in mind that it's not just the lens. You can ruin your mirror, you can ruin the shutter, you can ruin your sensor, anything inside the camera. So there's a lot of conflicting information I found when I did my research about filters. Most people were saying solar filters are the gold standard. You have to have a solar filter and nothing else is good. And, or you could use it, but you shouldn't. So basically, the thing with solar filters is they can be pretty expensive, especially if you're only going to buy it for this one thing. They could be $200, $300 sometimes. And they took a long time to source. I looked to order some online and they said, oh, it's not available for 2 or 3 weeks. Anyways, it's too late now for that. If you do want to look at a solar filter, some popular brands are Thousand Oaks Optical and the other two at the bottom. The next most common thing that people say you can shoot a Eclipse with is an ND filter. And the one that they suggest is a 16 stop. It's actually 16.5 or something like that. And they're easy to find. Usually, a lot of us have these in our camera bags already. You can stack these filters. You can put a 10 stop and a 6 stop. However, it's possible whenever you stack filters, obviously you're adding more glass to the end of your lens, which adds for possible distortion and whatnot. But I think for just shooting the sun for this event, it's not going to matter. It'll be fine. So you can definitely do that. Is a 10 stop okay? And this is one that I saw kind of conflicting information online. This is one of my all-time favorite photos from it's by a photographer named Joshua Cripps. He shot this with an ND10 stop in Dubai, and he says there's an article on Nikon about how he got this shot, and he says, quote, I used a 10 stop ND filter was on the lens. Keep in mind it's a 10 stop, but that looks like 90% totality. So it's not like 20% where 80% of the sun is showing. So there's a lot less sun in this case. But anyways, he used a 10 stop filter, and if he says it's good enough, it's good enough for me. But one really important thing to remember, you don't need a filter during totality. And the reason is that there's just not enough light. There's only this corona effect. It's a very low amount of light. If you have a filter on your lens, your photos are going to be super dark. If you have a 16 stop filter, it's going to be black, or your exposure time is going to be like a minute or something like that, way too long. So just before or the moments leading up to totality, take your filter off. And this photo is by Jungsun Lee, 2017. This is on Wikimedia Commons. He says, this, most amazing thing I've ever seen. And he said, I didn't use a filter. So no filter. Again, just showing you this is what it looks like without a filter.
Hey, Pete, that they say that you can even view the totality without protective glasses just during.
I didn't. I saw a picture of that with people with their glasses off, and I was actually wondering about that.
Yeah, but only during totality.
Okay, thank you. So, all right, this is the most important part. So, do's and don'ts for your eyes. Obviously, don't look directly at the eclipse. I saw on one of these little glasses type things that it said limit to 3 minutes of continuous viewing time with glasses, which I didn't know, because I think when Ujjwal and I were there, we just sat and we watched for like a long time, more than 3 minutes. But and we actually had these plastic glasses. Maybe I'll show them later. But anyways, according to the manufacturer, kind of like look at a bit and then look away. Also, there's this certification. It's called ISO, and you can see the number here. This is an international kind of standard for glasses. And the reason you want to look for this is There's a lot of fake glasses out there. I've saw a bunch of or found a bunch of articles. Amazon issuing refunds. Also, there was an article in the New York Times, the one to the right, Eclipses injured their eyes. And actually, there's an optometrist who says he won't even watch an eclipse. He's just like, I'm not even going to mess with it. So, what he does, he was saying he'll use like either do photos or I can't remember what he said, like showing the photo using paper, you can kind of see the reflection or something, the shadow. Anyways, even they were saying that some glasses have a fake ISO certification. And so I don't know how many of the glasses are fake. Obviously, if this is a very small fraction, even if it is, it's not acceptable. But there is one place that you can look. It's the American Astronomical Society. They have a list of approved suppliers. So you might want to check the glasses, if yours is from an approved supplier. I know my father said he got them from, actually, got them from the optometrist or something. I'm assuming those are good. Anyways, check your glasses is the main thing. Also, with your DSLR, if you have a DSLR, so you have a camera with that little mirror inside that flips up and down, then you absolutely don't want to look through the eyepiece of your camera. And the reason is that you are magnifying the light through your lens the same way you would through a what's the word? A magnifying glass. If you're looking through a magnifying glass and then you're focusing it right into your eye. So one thing you can do, though DSLRs, they often have a plastic piece that you can put over the eyepiece to cover it, or you could just get some electrical tape or something and cover it just so you don't inadvertently look through that. If you have a mirrorless camera or a DSLR with a live view, or these days they all have live view, you can safely look at live view or your LCD screen. And that's okay because you're not concentrating the light. You're just basically looking at a computer screen. You're not actually looking at the light. So that's okay. You just don't want to look through the eyepiece if you have a DSLR. And also, if you have binoculars or a telescope, you obviously want to use a filter with that as well. So about gear, choosing the right gear, it's really simple. Camera, tripod, shutter release. Lenses is probably the one that everybody has questions about. And something optional is a tracker. So the big question is, what lens should I use? If you're going for totality, a close-up, then you want to be using something between, ideally, this is ideal, 600 millimeter to 1,000 millimeter, and that's for a full frame DSLR. And if you have a crop sensor, you're ideally looking at 400 to 700 millimeter, and that's in the bottom right-hand corner of the slide if you didn't see it. Just to give you an idea, if you shoot with a 200 millimeter on a full frame, that top left photo, the sun is super small. You're not going to take up that much real estate in your composition. Whereas if you have a 2000 millimeter, you're actually too close and you're going to cut off the edge of the eclipse. So I think 600 millimeters actually is ideal. If you had, even 1,000, fine. But I really felt like 600 millimeters on a full frame or 400 millimeters on a crop sensor is very good. And you can always crop in if it's, not tight enough. You just have to crop in, or you can also increase the resolution of your photo and kind of make it bigger and crop in more. So that's, if you want this type of shot of totality, definitely you want to try and get 600 millimeters. If you only have 300 millimeters, still try it. But before the eclipse, go out into your backyard on a sunny day, take a picture of the sun, and what you see is what you're going to have on the day of the eclipse. So you'll know in advance, how much you'll have. This is a photo by Alan Wallace. Sadly, he passed away last week. But this is also one of my favorite Eclipse photos. This is a 50 millimeter. He has a great article about things I learned photographing the solar eclipse. I highly recommend you read it. Just Google his name and the article. Really amazing photographer and incredible work. You can also use a star tracker. Now, if you don't know what this is, you don't need to get one. And even if you have one, I might even say if it's your first eclipse, you might want to think about not using it, but you can. Basically, a star tracker is just a device which we use in astrophotography to match the rotation of the Earth and the stars, so you can take longer exposures. But on star trackers, there's also a setting for sun tracking. And the reason that that is good is because you'll always have the sun in your field of view. If you're using a 600 millimeter, you'll notice the sun is actually moving pretty fast. So you're on your tripod with a kind of like turret always moving to like stay continuously and keep the sun in the middle. And a tracker stops that. It'll just most of the, if you set it up right, it will stay guided the whole time. And Ujjwal is going to talk about that. He used one and he'll talk about that in a bit. But again, if you don't have one, absolutely don't worry. I didn't use one. You can still get great shots. So some essential camera settings. This is, we were practicing before the eclipse. This is in Moab. And Ujjwal is setting up his gear here. Okay, so before I talk about settings, I want to tell you about some special moments because that will dictate what settings you use. So there's kind of like 5 main things, stages, but also these are ones that photographers love to capture. Obviously, there's the partial eclipse. This lasts hours. Then there's something called Bailey's beads. That's at the bottom, and you've probably seen photos like this. It's just kind of this edge of sun coming over. That's 5 seconds before totality. Oh, I'm going to make this presentation available for download. So if you're writing down or whatever, I'll send it out. And you'll have all this information, or you can take a picture with your phone or whatever. But anyways, Bailey's beads, diamond ring is the next one. And that's the one I want. I couldn't get that with the annular eclipse. It doesn't have that. So that's one of my own personal kind of goals is to capture that diamond ring effect. That's 10 to 15 seconds before and after. Then there's the corona, and then there's totality, which, like I said before, can be anywhere from 10 seconds to 4 minutes or so. So the reason I'm showing you this is that the sun and the moon are obviously, moving over, the moon's moving over this, are in front of the sun. As the moon covers the sun, you have this massive amount of light and it's massively reduced very quickly. And a lot of these really awesome effects happen within seconds, 5-10 seconds, and you missed it. So how can you be sure to get it all at the same time? And so here's some kind of starting point settings just to show you an idea. So I would suggest shooting at f8. And so you could see that when shooting an eclipse at f8 with a 16 stop filter, your base exposure is 1/500th of a second. And the reason I would choose f8 is it's not too wide, so it's not letting in too much light. It's not too close, so it's not too dark. And usually, in general, most lenses tend to be sharpest around between f8 and f11. So your partial eclipse, you're at f8 1/500, but then at the corona, you're potentially up to 4 seconds. So, and by the way, that's the last 4 are no ND. Remember, you're taking off your filter here. So this is you're going from blocking out 16 stops of light and shooting out a 500th to not blocking out any light and shooting potentially for 4 seconds, which is a huge difference. So my recommendation is to shoot in aperture priority. I wouldn't shoot in manual because the amount of light is changing so fast that you're not going to be able in manual to quickly change all the different settings to correctly expose for each scene. So the first thing would be is to shoot an aperture priority. The second thing, and somebody asked about this earlier, was bracketing. And so I would suggest bracketing your shots. And if you're going to bracket, I would do 3 brackets of 2 stops. So for example, 2 stops underexposed, a base exposure of 0, and then overexposed by 2 stops. Or I would do 5 brackets of 1 stop. So that would be 2 under, 0, 1 over, 2 over. And if you're not familiar with bracketing is simply when you underexpose or overexpose your image on purpose. And there's an example on the right here. You can see that the top image is underexposed by 4 stops. That means there's 8 times less light than there is at 0. And then there's the 0 or neutral exposure, and then the +4 is over. I wouldn't do 404. Like I said, I would do -2, 0, +2. But I would also practice in your backyard and see, don't take my word for it, just practice on your own and see how that works for you. Next up, don't let your shutter speed go slower than 1/4 of a second. And the reason is that the moon is moving. It's moving past the sun. And if you go more than, say, 1/4 of a second, then you're going to get motion blur. So the moon will look blurry on the edges. The same way that if you do a long exposure of stars at night if you do a long exposure of 35, 40 seconds, you're going to have light trails on the stars. You're going to have motion blur on the moon. So I don't think I ever shot as low as 1/4 of a second, but the suggested speed, minimum speed is don't go below 1/4 of a second. Also remember, you're zooming way in. This is like a 1/4 of a second is more for a telephoto shot. If you're at 600 millimeters, you're filling up the screen with the sun and moon, the eclipse. So it's moving very fast. Also, you might want to think about using auto ISO rather than ISO 100. And there's a couple of reasons for that. The first reason is if you're bracketing and you're using ISO 100 and you do 2 stops under or more, sometimes your exposure time will be super long, because in order to underexpose, oh, wait a minute, I said that backwards. If you are 2 stops over, if you want to make it brighter, maybe it's going to have to leave the shutter open well beyond 1/4 of a second. So auto ISO would be my suggestion. I know everybody worries about, oh, but if it's higher than ISO 100, there'll be too much noise. Or first off, even at ISO 600, you probably won't see any noise. Even probably at ISO 800, if you have a camera that came out in the last 3-4 years. But this is a once in a lifetime event, and I would rather have a sharp photo with a bit of noise than a blurry photo at ISO 100. So I use auto ISO. And really important, you want to put your metering mode to evaluative. That's also on some cameras, it's called matrix. On others, it's called multi. And this is really important because if you're using spot metering and you're zoomed way into the eclipse and the moon is halfway over, you're going to expose for that dark part of the moon and your photo will be blown out. Or vice versa, if you're using spot metering or center weighted and it's the sun, then your picture is going to be super dark. Evaluative will basically look at the amount of light that's coming into your camera and divide it up equally, I guess you could say, to expose for the scene. So evaluative, and evaluative is usually the default setting on most cameras when you get it from the manufacturer. It'll be evaluative. And the last and most important thing I'd say is practice. You have to practice this because this is one of those things that's like a once in a lifetime event. And you're like, oh my God, it's happening. And you get nervous and you're freaking out, and you're like, and then there's maybe like some issue with your camera, and you're like, what do I do now? And then, so I can't stress enough to just do this a few times, like work through it in your backyard just on a sunny day, so that when the moment actually happens, it's just kind of like second nature and you know how to do it. So that helps a lot. If you're never shot an Eclipse, you're a beginner, and maybe you're shooting an auto or just kind of getting out of auto, or it's just your first Eclipse and you want to keep it super simple, stupid, easy, then this is what I recommend. I would go for the totality. I would just kind of focus on getting the totality. And I would aperture priority, f8, maybe 1/250th, but this is aperture priority, which means your camera is going to adjust the shutter speed accordingly. So you don't have to plug in the shutter speed, the camera will choose it for you. And that's that kind of set it and forget it mentality. You don't have to calculate, you can just sit back and watch the eclipse and let it happen. Again, meter evaluative, ISO auto. There's no filter, so you don't even have to buy a filter. You're on a tripod though, and definitely for everything, I'm always shooting in RAW, especially for something like this, like an Eclipse. There's a high dynamic range difference between the, the brightest and darkest part of the Eclipse, and so you really want to work in RAW so that you have more flexibility to recover highlights in post. But if you just shoot in JPEG and you don't know what RAW is, I would put it on RAW and RAW plus JPEG, and then you have the JPEG for now. The camera will edit the photo for you, and then a month later, weeks later, 6 months later, when you learn about editing and Lightroom, you have a RAW file to go back with and work on down the road when you get more skilled. Quick tip, if all else fails, shoot the Eclipse with your phone. One important thing is just lock the focus with your finger on your phone. You can hold your Eclipse glasses over the phone. I tried this. It was kind of hard to get a good shot, but hey, it might just work for you. I think Ujjwal got a decent shot, if I remember correctly.
It was all right.
It was all right. Yeah, nothing like you could actually get from the actual thing. And now I want to share some amazing photos that Ujjwal got during our eclipse. So Ujjwal, tell us a little bit about this shot.
So this was the moment at annularity, and I was shooting at aperture priority at auto ISO, I believe. So this was tracked. I was using this was with a 300 millimeter lens with a teleconverter. So the effective focal length was 420 millimeters, and actually it's 420 though, not 630.
Well,
And
it's the APS-C, so you multiply by 1.5.
Right. And then with the filter that I was using was a screw-on, you all have the filter by now. So this is what I was using. It's from Thousand Oaks, not an ND16 stop. Thousand Oaks filter, and the settings were, it was an aperture priority, so the camera took it at 1/13th of a second, kept it at f8. I practiced in my backyard before the eclipse, and so f8 was the optimal, way to go. And ISO, I kept it at auto, and then I think changed it to 400. And I used the tracker, the Benro Polaris tracker. But this was a single exposure. I was taking exposures every, I think, 10 seconds or something like that, so I could get all the phases. The image that Pete showed before was similar on another tracker, using a move, shoot, move, using a wide angle, so I could get a bit of the foreground earlier, and then I composited it over the foreground. Yeah. So this was the entire sequence. So if you do take an entire sequence, you can, play around in post-processing and composite it with the foreground having a nice composite picture like this. And then if you have all the individual frames, You can have the shots like I had it at annularity, but you'll also have it during the Bailey's Bees, Diamond Ring, and those would be the first for me. So this would be my first total. So I'm looking forward to those. But you can have a lot of fun with post processing later on. One thing I would like to tell you regarding the tracking is if you guys use the tracker, you know that you kind of polar align first. The Bendro Polaris is unique. You don't need the North Star or any, to polar align. So you just, set it to track the sun and it'll track the sun. However, a traditional tracker like iOptron Sky Tracker or the Move Shoot Move or the Skywatcher Star Adventurer, you would need to get polar aligned using the North Star. But how do you see the North Star during the day? You don't. So you sort of kind of improvise. So there are apps where you can use the daytime polar alignment. Or what I did with the Move Shoot Move was I made sure that the tracker faced north, and you can find north with your camera compass. Make sure your phone is actually calibrated properly, so it's pointing to the north the way it's supposed to. So you point your tracker to the north, and then you find out the approximate latitude of where you're shooting from. So this was in Utah. So I calculated, your compass will tell you what your latitude is at that. So you basically tilt the tracker to that approximate angle. There are digital scales, and you can use to come to that value pretty close. So let's say I'm in New Jersey and my location is about 42 degrees. So I played around in the backyard with that. So I made sure I knew how to get to that right latitude when I was in Utah. So that worked out. And then once I was polar aligned, quote unquote, daytime polar aligned, I let it rip. But I'll tell you one thing about that wide angle exposure. I mean, people tell you do not point your camera at the sun without the filter, but that entire sequence in the wide angle was taken without any filter. However, the pictures were blown out, so I could not use any of those pictures. So this was a composite from the telephoto that I used. But my camera was fine. The camera is still fine. I'm still shooting with it. It's nothing wrong with the sensor because it was a wide angle. So you can try that, but I'm not recommending it. Use your filter. That's what I would go by. And this is a sequence that I created out of the 300 that I use, 300 millimeter. And you can learn all these tricks how to do them on YouTube. There are videos on how to do a composite like that and things like that. And you can also do time lapses. So if you take a number of shots from start to finish, you can put them in a time lapse and you'll have a cool little video from beginning to end. And that should be fun.
Thank you. I know there's a question. We'll get to questions in about 5 minutes. I know that some of these things you can be led down rabbit holes and go on. So
Right.
just want to get through the rest of this, then we'll answer any other questions. So this is the shot that I did. It's a composite, and so it's basically two photos: one photo for the sky, one for the landscape. You can see my settings without a filter, and I had to close down as fat, make as least amount of light possible enter the camera as possible, and that was the maximum settings. The same thing happened to me though without a filter. It was sometimes overexposed, so depending on how much of the sun, how much the moon covered the sun. Yeah, just A7 III, 200 to 600 millimeter, and I just moved the camera around on my tripod, and Yeah, it was just kind of obviously the sun is not this big in the sky. And I really was just kind of going for something more artistic. I loved the our kind of like a digital art, more digital art style. I loved the canyons. There's a river that goes through there. That's the Goosenecks, and there's the San Juan River. It just has this timeless feel to it. So that really kind of caught my eye, and that's was something really special about seeing the eclipse in that location. And I just wanted to kind of get a bigger sun. A lot of people ask, what are those lines coming off the side of the sun? And I didn't add that in post. That's what I got out of the camera. I think those are, if you ever see a sunburst or starburst effect, if you shoot at f16, you get these sun spikes. I was at f29. I don't know if this is some sort of like reverse sun spike type thing, but I think that's some kind of light refraction or something from the blades in the camera. All right, so yeah, we're going to jump to a Q&A. Before I do that, I'd like to just tell you where you can connect with Ujjwal. Here's all of his information. Do you want to say something about the exhibit, Ujjwal?
Yeah,
Your exhibit?
currently my astro photos and some landscape photos are being exhibited at the local library at the town that I'm from, and it's going to run through April 13th. If you are in Old Bridge or New Jersey, you're welcome to come stop by and take a look.
And definitely stop by. It's awesome. There's more actually than just this photo. You have a couple of displays there.
Yes, there's another
So
display and then the
yeah.
revolving display. Yes.
Are you
Thank
going
you.
to be there? You should have like a welcoming night or something to meet everyone.
I
Like
wish
a
I could
yeah.
be, but with the library closing around,
Oh,
I think
right,
9 to 6
right.
or something like that. So, and plus it's a library, so we have to keep it quiet.
Well, well, if you're going there, hit Ujjwal up.
Absolutely.
Tell him you're in town. I'm sure he'll meet you.
Sure.
As for me, here's my contact info. Like I said, I lead photography tours and workshops. I also do coaching online and in person. If you have any questions, inquiries, or whatnot, you can send an email to me there or reach out in one of those places. I also post information about my tours and online coaching at the that website up there. And speaking of tours, I have one coming up in October. There's 2 dates, the last week of September. There's another one running the first week of October. It's a 5-day Monument Valley astrophotography tour. It's going to be absolutely amazing. Ujjwal has been there before, but actually, when we went to Muley Point, we could see Monument Valley from the distance, and he was wearing a Monument Valley shirt, and he was like, "Oh my God, is that Monument Valley?" And
It's
we,
absolutely magical. Monument Valley is breathtakingly magical. So you'll have a great time if you
yeah,
go here.
yeah, we were both were saying we're like it's a feeling that place. So, anyways, that is September, October 2024. And now let's jump into the Q&A. I does anyone? Oh, Matt, let's just start with you. Thank you. Oh, Ellie, you have a question. Go ahead. I see your hand. Are you? Oh, no, you clapped, so it went. Matt, you had a question. How do you focus on the sun? When I was shooting, I used autofocus, and and then if you want to just leave it locked, you can just move from auto to manual. And how about you? Did you have any, or you could do a manual focus as well.
Yeah,
Yeah,
what
what
I
do
did
you do
was
as
I
well?
put the filter on and I zoomed in. I got to the edge of the sun,
Right.
and that leaves you, gives you a good detail, and then you just manually focus until the rim of the sun is sharp, and you can see sunspots, and those sunspots should be, pretty pinpoint too. So that's how I did it too.
And the autofocus should work, unlike shooting, astrophotography, trying to focus on stars, the sun. worked pretty well.
So another question, Pete,
Yep.
would be, there's a similar question in the comments, so that's why I'm sort of repeating it. But so like I told you earlier, I bought one of these slip-on filters for the camera. When do you put on the filter and when do you take it off? When you say, people say, well, you don't need it for totality, at what point do you take off the filter?
Right. Ujjwal, when did you take off your filter?
I did not, because it was annularity. I kept it throughout, but this time, as it's approaching, I think end of like C2, like the first contact, and you're about to see your first diamond ring, you can take it off at that time. And then as soon as the sun goes into totality, you're fine. And then as soon as you start seeing the second, like, coming out of C2, going into C3, I believe, where the second diamond ring is about to pop up, get ready to put it back on, because then the sun's going to come into view again. So I would take it off from the time I would see the first diamond ring effect, and then through totality. And then as soon as you start seeing the second diamond ring appear, get ready to put it back on.
So then are you saying then C2, not C2, or what designations on that? Because
so see, once the first contact is when the eclipse starts, and then
exactly.
C2 is when the right, exactly. So C2 would be when the diamond ring is about to take effect. So when you start to see 99% of the sun being obscured, being eclipsed, you can take the filter off. You can even view the sun without your glasses. But please don't be carried away and leave the filter off once, because the totality, again, depending on where you are, 30 seconds to 4 minutes. So please be very mindful of that time, and that you put your glasses back on your eyes and the filters back on your lenses. But also, please enjoy the eclipse. And because that's once in a lifetime. And if we get too bogged down with settings and all that, you're going to miss the real fun. So try to please enjoy the eclipse too.
Yeah, there's a comment I was just reading, Wilbur's comment about exactly that. And that's something I wanted to mention. I kind of touched on a little bit, which is basically, yes, take time to savor it. I there's always this big argument about does photography heighten the experience or take you away from it? And for me, it takes me away from it when I frustrated with using my camera or getting the shot. But it draws me into it when I'm in the flow and I'm just the camera is just like a third eye and it's just, capturing this. And then you have this image that to savor, well beyond the eclipse. And so it's kind of like a mix of everything. And yes, the eclipse, there was another comment that about, the partial eclipse takes hours. So that was another thing I didn't mention was there's a lot of, the totality is the kind of the star of the show, but you could be there for hours before watching the sun slowly move over the sun. So if you get there before it actually starts, you have, maybe it's going to start at 12 and end at 6 p.m., for example. It's just the totality is that 4 minutes right in the middle. So you can kind of savor the whole thing, but then you also want to savor totality. And what I remember is the temperature dropped. It got darker, not as much as a total eclipse because there's still annularity and there's still some sun coming through, but you could feel the temperature dropped like 10, maybe 10 degrees. I don't know. And the light got,
Dims.
the light got like kind of how the light is at dawn or dusk. except the sun is above you. It's not like on the horizon or below. It was just a light unlike any I've ever seen. Also, Wilbur mentioned, thank you, Wilbur. If you look at the shadows on the ground, like through the leaves, you'll see little eclipse shadows on the ground.
Mhm.
Also, I'm sure you've read or heard, cows start mooing or birds chirp. It's just a really different, really visceral experience.
Pete, remember when we were shooting it, people started chanting and, playing drums, music, people started
Right.
singing the national anthem. It was a pretty cool people experience too.
Yeah.
So
Right.
it's one, heavenly experience up top, and then you have a people experience around you. So that's good.
Right. Linda asked if I will send the slideshow. Yes, I'll send a link to download the slides. And
Hey, I made a link in the comments to, it's not really a link, but it's for the Solar Eclipse Timer app, which is phenomenal app. It even works. It tells you audibly when each thing is going to be going once you set it up for your location, your GPS location.
cool.
So it'll actually say ding 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 first contact in 5 seconds or whatever you have it set up to, and then count down and then tell you. So that and it also has a video of how to use it, and then it also has a a photographer's version, which frankly I don't find it as helpful as the other one. But yeah.
This is a good one. Mary says, if you're going to be in the sun for hours, be sure to have sunscreen. I got burned that day. I didn't put on sunscreen. I didn't think about it, but it's silly. But yeah, it's important, wear sunscreen. Carmen asked, do you need to put your lens cap on in between shots, such as every 5 minutes? And the answer is, well, what I did was I just we were there for the entire eclipse. So we were there like 6 hours. When I took a shot, I'd point my camera at the sun, take my shot, and then point my camera away from the sun, just put it to the side. So the sun's not coming directly into the camera. I suppose you could put a lens cap on, but for me, that's just an extra step because the sun is moving. So you're going to have to move your camera anyways. I just wouldn't leave your camera. If you have a telephoto lens, you don't want to leave your camera pointed directly looking at the sun at 600 millimeters without a filter for even 20 seconds. Did somebody want to say something?
Yeah,
I
Rakesh
had a
has a
question.
question.
Oh yeah, go ahead. Is that Rakesh?
Yeah, that's me.
Hey,
Rakesh.
Rakesh, go for it.
Hey, Pete. No, I think you answered it. So, with regards to pointing the lens at the sun, that's okay with the filter, right? We don't require to have to cover it up or move things around if there's a filter on at all times.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, Pete, one observation. You had commented before about a telephoto lens at 600 millimeters. My sense is if you're doing that, you're going to have too much of the sun and not enough of the corona during totality.
Yeah. So we actually, in annularity, we didn't have the corona, like, these wispy things coming off. So yeah, what I was reading, the recommendation is 600 millimeters, but I guess, if it's too close, then just go zoom back to 500 or whatever. But I think it's always better, and I always tell everybody this for any type of photography, always leave some extra room around the edges of your composition. And when I say extra room, I mean 10, 15%, maybe even 20% sometimes. That way you can always crop in or move the crop a little bit if you want to. But if you zoom in and you get exactly this tight crop and you get exactly what you want, then maybe when you get home, you're like, oh, it's kind of cutting the edges. I wish I just pulled back a little bit. So with any of these cameras, if you're using, a 20 or 20 something, 23 megapixel camera, minimum, whatever, you can always crop in even, 20%, and you still have enough pixels to
And on top of that, you got super resolution.
Yeah, and then you can also, yeah, you can do something like super resolution where you can increase. Basically, you take a 24 megapixel photo, you double the size to 48 megapixels, and then you can crop in even more. And this is a kind of roundabout way to actually increase your reach. So if you only have a 300 millimeter lens, you can double the size of your photo after, and then crop in a half, and you have an effective 600 millimeter view. But I've done this plenty of times. The downside is it's not always as sharp as if you shot at 600 millimeters and had a good lens, but it's definitely good enough. In fact, that's what I did with my shot earlier.
Pete,
Yeah.
this is Wilbur Norman.
Hey, well,
One of the things, since most people don't have equatorial mounts, a lot of people I've seen, I've gone to a lot of eclipses starting in 1979. But if you, most people put their long lens and camera on the tripod straight ahead, as we all do, to go up and down and sideways. If you have a mount that you can flop the lens over at a 45-degree angle on your tripod head, then it is much easier. You're only having to follow the tracking, and this goes for comets and stars and everything else. You only have to track my hand. You only have to move the lens at that angle rather than having to go up and over each time. Because it doesn't move fast, but when you're actually trying to take it, it's amazing how frustrating it is to have to go up and over, up and over. And at an angle, at a slant, you just are going in one diagonal line with your lens and camera.
that's a good tip. Yeah, it moves so fast, especially if you're zoomed in at 600 millimeters. It's really moving across
Yeah.
the sky. Cool, great tip.
And then one thing I also found was, you think the sun being that big in the sky would be easy to find. It's not easy to
No, it's
find
not.
it. So
It's
just,
absolutely
don't get frustrated. I mean, if you have to, let's say you put the filter on and trying to find the sun, what I did was, if I couldn't find it, I removed the filter for a split second, found the bright, star, sun, and then I put the filter back on. Then I have something to go back to, try to focus, get it in frame. So just don't automatically assume, oh, it's so easy to find the sun, I should be able to find it.
No, you're right, Ujjwal. I was experimenting with the 1000 oak solar filter a couple of weeks ago, and it's so difficult to find the sun even on a bright, sunny day.
Oh, and one other thing, I mean, for people who do night photography with other people, they tend to dim their LCD screens, brighten it up. Because if you dim it as it is with the filter on, you won't be able to see the sun. And then, so if you need to brighten up the brightness of the LCD screen, so at least you see it, and then you get some idea where it is, and then you can go from there and try to fine tune and focus it.
If you're using a 600 millimeter when you're looking for the sun, you want to zoom out to 200 millimeters,
Right.
or whatever your lens is, to find
Start,
it.
right.
Because if you go right to 600 millimeters, you're looking for a needle in the haystack. You're like, where's the sun? Where's the sun?
Right. I have a
Obviously, where it
150
is.
to 600 that I'm going to be using. So I'm going to start at 150 and then gradually increase it from there.
We have a comment from Joanne from Singapore. Welcome, Joanne. Yeah, I used to live in Singapore. Cool. So yeah, and there's no eclipse in Singapore, but there's basically an eclipse happens about every, I think, year to year and a half, somewhere in the world. There won't be another one in the US for I think 40 something years. But I know there's one, in 2 years in Spain. They're all, they're happening all around the world. And I think they can be pretty addictive once you start shooting them, that you kind of want to chase these eclipses. Did I answer everyone's question? I'm looking through the comments, or if anyone has a question. Oh, Joanne, go for it.
I have a question, sorry. You covered it and I kind of blanked out. In between, something I had read said, put your motor drive on high. And keep running it. And you mentioned the problem of having, even with the filter, having your lens exposed for a very long time to the sun could be problematic. So I was a little confused about, should I put the cap on, as someone said earlier, in between, or should I not do the motor drive? I could use some guidance. I've never done this.
Okay, so first off, the motor drive, or whether you're shooting on like high, medium, or low. So basically you press the shutter and it's one shot, or you hold it down and it's 5 shots a second or 35 shots a second. Um, Definitely during totality, when you have the beads and the ring and all that, I'd probably be shooting on like a medium or high, maybe not high, but I mean you're holding, because this stuff is happening after a few seconds, and there could be a difference of just a few seconds. So like when that annularity is happening, that's when you want to take many shots at once. But earlier, when it's a partial eclipse, you take one and then maybe you wait 30 minutes or 10 minutes and then take another. And
So
so,
would you
but
continue to be bracketing through that, or would you change it? Because you're kind of changing the game a little bit. You're going
well,
from one
so
kind of shooting to another like
yeah,
that.
exactly. You are. So the partial eclipse would be, yes, I would bracket, but you don't need to shoot in high mode because it's not that different from 1 second to the next, even from 5 minutes to the next. It's moving, slowly. Moon's moving slowly over the sun. So partial eclipse, you must have a filter, and I would bracket, and you don't need to shoot in the high speed mode. Just take a shot, look at it, see how it works. But during annularity or totality, you don't need a filter. So you take the filter off, and everything's happening very quickly. At least that part where there's the diamond ring and the beads and whatnot. There, I would be shooting, many shots at once. Hold it down and shot, 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 or something like that. I mean, you could do more, but then you'll come home with 1,000 photos and it all
Well,
looks.
I'll be a nervous wreck trying to get this done. You know that.
Right.
So I think I'll just keep it on the high drive. Okay.
But the high drive, though, if you have it in high drive and you're bracketing, especially if you're shooting 5 brackets, it's going to go click one, and then maybe it's 1/500th of a second. That's really fast. The next one's going to be like even, but then it's going to go slower and slower. So when you overexpose, if you're overexposing by 2 stops or 4 stops, one shot could maybe take 2 seconds.
So what if you didn't really do 2 stops over, 2 stops under, and one in the middle? What if you did 3 shots and it was 0, 1, and 1? I mean, is it that dynamic a shot that you're really going to lose so much
Well, one
for the
stop isn't,
filter?
I think one stop is not really necessary because you can recover one stop in Lightroom. It's not really going to make much of a difference. Although for some people, they might say, oh, I can see so much difference, but I don't think you really need to.
I'm not a big bracketer. For me,
Well,
it
if you don't
slows
want
my
to,
everything down.
okay, so if you don't want to bracket, then what I would suggest, and you don't have to, it's just like an insurance policy, so to speak.
All right.
But you don't have to. But if you're not bracketing, then I would just move your exposure compensation to
Yeah.
one stop under.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
you'll underexpose just a little bit, but you'll easily be able to recover shadows. But really, the only shadow is the moon. It's black anyways, so you're not really recovering much. You're just kind of guaranteeing or trying to prevent the camera from overexposing.
Yeah. Well, having never done it and knowing I want to get it, I'm trying to make it as least complicated so that what I do would guarantee I'll get it. And if I have to pull it back in post, I can do that. But if I don't want to be screwing around with the camera so much, you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
miss it.
then this is kind of my main message is, and I think something Wilbur touched on earlier is, just enjoy it and keep it really simple. That's why I had that one slide was like basic. I mean, yes, it's once in a lifetime, but maybe you'll travel. I mean, Ujjwal is already now on his second eclipse in a year, and me too. So they say it's once in a lifetime, but maybe you'll go see another one. So, I mean, I would ideally, for me, it was kind of like, just want to get one good shot, just something to remember it by. If I don't get all this and all that, just
Okay.
think of one thing that you really want, focus on that and go for it.
Hey, Linda has a
Okay.
question regarding video.
Oh, sorry. I'm thinking of taking video or time lapse. Ujjwal, you did time lapse.
I did time lapse only through the camera. I took the number of exposures that I took throughout the sequence from start to finish, and I put that in time lapse mode. I didn't take a live video with the phone or anything, so I won't be able to answer the phone video part. But time lapse is easy to do. You can combine them in post, Lightroom, easy.
And if you do live video from your phone, you're not going to see the eclipse unless you have some special filter, I think, on your phone. The sun's going to be so small unless you have a super telephoto on your phone and you have a filter. It's going to be so small. It's like just take your phone and point it at the sun and do a video of the sun. It's a blob. It's not really going to show anything. So I wouldn't really suggest, if you want a good video, I would do a time lapse, but that's pretty complicated. So,
Pete, this
yeah.
is Wilbur again here. Three things. One for Joanne is I don't normally use a view after I have a Sony. I don't normally do a review of the pictures, but if you turn on a 1, 2, or 3 second review, you can actually see sort of what you have, the quality of your photograph a bit. Two other things is, especially for long lenses, I think everyone should use an electronic or wired shutter release, or put your release on like for when you click the button to give it 3 seconds to stabilize, because it's amazing how you won't even see a 600 millimeter lens. I have a really solid, good tripod, and my pictures will still be slightly fuzzy if I don't use a cable release, if I touch the camera and take the shot right then. So I have 3 cable releases because I once at an eclipse, one didn't work. And of course, you don't want to spend all this money traveling to a place to not have it work. So I have 1 wired and 2 electronic ones. But you can also just put your self timer on for 3 seconds. Now that's a problem when you want to do Bailey's beads and stuff, because it all happens so quickly. But just a 3 second review and a cable release will save you lots of angst when it comes to looking at your pictures.
Yeah, I'll also,
Yeah.
if I may say something, 2 other things picking up on what Wilbur said, have lots of spare batteries. You do not
Oh,
want to
yeah.
run out of battery at the time of totality. So check your battery power as it's going on and have it ready just so quickly you shut it off, put it back in. If you see your battery running low, it happened to me as it was approaching annularity.
Oh,
I took a look at the screen and it was dying down. So I quickly, changed the battery. I knew how to put it back in, so know how to put it back in quickly and have it ready at the go. That's one thing. And the second thing is, if anybody is tracking at whatever 600, 400 millimeters, this, even though the tracker is following the sun would tend to drift out. So make sure you put it back in the frame again if you're seeing that it's drifting off your viewfinder.
here's the other thing too. In addition to all of that, turning off your image stabilization on your long lenses, it's a common error to leave it on. And then when there is, Wilbur, a little bit of shake or a little bit of something not right, it's like your camera lens is fighting with your tripod. So like I keep the image stabilization on my long lenses. So, I have to make turn it off.
So one thing, if you're shooting at 600 millimeters and you don't want lens shake, Like you're in this, like Wilbur was saying, at 600 millimeters, things, any of the slightest wind, if it's a windy day, even if you're on a sturdy tripod, your lens could be like moving a little bit. If you match your shutter speed with your focal length, that should stop any lens blur. So basically, you don't want to shoot slower than 1/600. Maybe to be safe, you could put it at 1/800. And that's pretty easy to do when the sun's super bright in front of you. You can kind of just make sure that you're at 1/800. And that will get rid of any chance that there's that camera shake.
I also throw my beanbag over top of a long lens for some weight and stability. Texas gets winds, and so it's liable to be windy a bit. And so if you have a beanbag or something, throw it over top of the lens in the center, and that helps for stability.
Perfect. Thank you for the tips, everyone. Oh, Bob, you got a question? Or is that
No,
goodbye?
I'm shooting off, Pete.
Okay. Well, I'm gonna wrap things up. Thank you, everyone. I just put my email, my website in the chat over there. If you have any questions, just shoot me an email. And also, please share with me your photos or videos, whatever. Send me an email. Hit me up on Instagram or Facebook or wherever. I'd love to see your shots, and I'm going to share some of them in my newsletter. So anyways, thank you all for joining. Thank you, Matt Brandon, for helping out here. And also big thanks to Ujjwal for sharing your work. Really appreciate it and your experience and from our trip.
Good luck to everybody. Clear skies.
Yes, wishing everyone clear skies. If you have a question, shoot me an email. Thank you, everyone, and good night.
Bye-bye. Good night.
Thanks, guys.
Bye, Joanne.
Bye-bye. Good night.
Bye, Bob.
Bye now.
Bye.
Bye, Pete.
Thanks, Pete.
Bye-bye.